Hello chaps, welcome once again to John Robson Guitar Tuition. As always, I do hope you're well. Today we're taking a look at the bluesy jazz fusion style of the great Robben Ford. I first came across Robben's music in the late 80s when I'd read about him in, I think it was Guitar Player magazine, when they were talking about his new album at the time, Talk to Your Daughter, and managed to get hold of a copy and absolutely blown away by it. If you haven't heard it, then I can't recommend it highly enough. Another good one to check out is, I think it was from 1990 or 91, I think it must have been his follow-up album called The Blue Line, which is again a fantastic blues, rock, jazz crossover album. Absolutely fantastic. So that's what we're going to be getting into today. I think the first thing to do really is to take a look at the basic chord sequence that we're going to be dealing with in this lesson. Here it is. Now that is basically a standard jazz blues 12-bar chord sequence. It does sound a little bit ordinary played like that though, so let's see if we can zhuzh it up a bit with a few of Robben's favourite chord voicings. Here's a little bit of info on that. Right, let's take a look at a few of Robben's favourite chord voicings, and we're going to start with this one. This is a dominant ninth shape. There you go. You can see the shape in the corner of the screen. That's how it sounds, and this is how you kind of play it. First of all, that finger, first finger there, second finger there it is, and then your third finger is barring those three strings like that, and that gives you that chord. Your second finger here is playing the root note of the chord, so up at the 12th fret, this is an A, so that's an A dominant ninth, or just an A ninth for short. You can turn that into a nice sounding 13th chord just by reaching up with your little finger to this note here. And that is the basis of many a funky blues kind of chord vamp, like this kind of thing. That kind of thing. And speaking of 13th chords, here's another one that Robben uses quite a lot. It's this shape here, and once again take a look at the corner of the screen and you can see the shape. That's how it sounds. There's your second finger, third finger, fourth finger tucking in under there like that, and then your first finger comes over the top for this note here. Unusually for a chord shape, you've got the root note is the highest note in the chord. Usually you tend to expect the root note to be at the bottom of the chord or somewhere near the bottom, but here it's right on top. So you can create a nice little 9th chord to 13th chord vamp like this as well. That kind of thing. It just adds a little bit of movement to what would otherwise be just sitting on a kind of a static dominant 7th chord. The other thing that struck me when I was first kind of learning about all this stuff is that inside that 9th chord, there it is, again, let's go back to that, you can see that lurking at the top end of that chord there is a little E minor triad. That's an E minor chord. And also within this 13th chord here, there is an F sharp minor chord. There it is. So what that kind of implied to me was that, you know, if I wanted to create something a little bit more interesting than just strumming away on a 7th chord, I can play a vamp that moves between F sharp minor, there it is there, and an E minor. And if we move these down to like a 5th fret kind of position where we naturally tend to think of A as having its home base, then you would find there's an F sharp minor there, and there's an E minor there. So just playing those over an A bass note, you can get quite a recognisable little rhythm guitar part that goes like this: 2, 3, 4. And then you can transpose that into the other chords within the blues, like the D7 and the E7. If you're playing it over a D7, then the two chords would become B minor and A minor. So there's a D root note there, so you'd have your B minor, A minor like that. You get E7 would give you C sharp minor and B minor. There's your E root there. So there you go, you could construct maybe an entire 12-bar blues based around those substitutions, and it, as I say, it just provides a little bit of light relief from sitting on a strummy kind of bar chord kind of thing like that, and just makes the rhythm guitar part sound a little bit more interesting. Now, as well as those chord voicings, Robben also uses quite a lot, along with a lot of other blues players, a way of kind of vamping on a dominant 7th chord. You'll also hear this in Funk 49 by Joe Walsh as well, actually. But anyway, here's a little bit of info on how to do that really quite useful dominant 7th chord vamp. Okay, let's have a look at this 7th chord vamp then. Basically I'm going to be playing the root note with my thumb on the low E string, and then I'm going to be adding these 3 notes on the 4th, 3rd and 2nd strings with my 1st finger. Now this actually gives us a minor 7th shape, so that's a nice useful one if you need to play a minor 7th that sounds a bit bluesy, like that. But what we're going to do is we're going to make this into a dominant 7th shape simply with the addition of this little hammer on here. Just onto the 3rd string, and that's going to be at the 6th fret in this case. And that in itself gives you just a nice useful little 7th chord vamp that you can use all by itself. Like that. But we're going to take it one stage further by adding this little D major triad here. Okay, just as a way of adding a little bit of tension, and the move basically goes like this. And that is the basic move behind this vamp, and you can develop all kinds of ideas around that, you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. That kind of thing. It's also very useful to get into this D 9th shape, this 9th chord shape that we looked at earlier, because you can very easily walk down with this finger and this finger into that 9th chord shape to get this kind of transition. Like that, and that's a little lick that I use all the time when I'm playing rhythm guitar. So there you go. That is a lovely little dominant 7th chord vamp that works well in pretty much any blues setting. And alongside those techniques, there are a couple of places where Robben will add some really rather tense jazzy ideas into the chord progression. And it's not as difficult as you might think. Here's some info. Okay, one of the main places where we can add a little bit of jazzy tension via the chord sequence and via the lead part, as we'll see later, is here at the end of the 4th bar, as the chords are ascending by 4th from A7 to D7. And basically the little trick here is to add an E flat 7th into the end of that A7 bar. It's going to sound a bit like this. Another great place to add similar tension is right at the end of the 12-bar sequence, where we're on the E7 chord and coming back round to the A7, because once again the chords are ascending via a fourth from E7 to A7, and we can pull off a similar trick there simply by playing a B flat 7 over the E7 as it leads back into the A7, which will sound a little bit like this. And those ideas there, where you're playing, say, an E flat 7 over an A7 chord, that is known as a tritone substitution. Sounds complicated, but don't worry. Tritone just basically is 3 tones, or 6 frets, if you like. And E flat 7th is 6 frets away from A 7th, in the same way as B flat 7th. There's your B flat there at the 6th fret. That is 6 frets away from the E7 that we're playing the B flat over in that example. So hence it's called a tritone substitution. As I hinted at there, it's going to be quite a useful thing for putting some jazzy tension into the lead guitar side of things, which we'll come to later. But for now, let's just take a listen to what that basic 12-bar blues chord sequence is going to sound like when you start adding in all of these chord voicings and tritone substitutions and dominant 7th chord vamps to come up with something a little bit like this. So that's how you can apply some movement and create a little bit more interest and momentum to a standard 12-bar blues chord sequence in the way that Robben does all the time, really. Next up, I guess it's time to take a look at his lead guitar style, or what I learned from it anyway. Now, for the most part, when he's playing lead guitar, he tends to employ the techniques that I outlined in a previous video. I think it's called How to Play Blues Like a Pro. There's a link to it in the description below, so if you haven't seen it, I would urge you to check it out. But just to summarise what's going on is that if you're playing, say, a standard 12-bar blues, 3 chords, in the key of A, then you sit on an A minor pentatonic over the whole of the chord sequence, and as each chord comes along, you add in the major pentatonic of that chord. So, for example, over the A7 chord, you would add in the A major pentatonic. Over the D7 chord, you would add in the D major pentatonic to the A minor pentatonic that is the bedrock of it all. By doing this, you end up generating, without really having to try, some slightly more interesting and harmonically complex scales. Like for instance, if you add together A major pentatonic and A minor pentatonic, you end up getting the A Dorian mode and the A Mixolydian mode without really any effort at all on your part. But there are one or two areas in the chord sequence where Robben kind of throws in a few jazzy kind of bebop style ideas, and that's what we're going to be dealing with here. Whereabouts in the chord sequence is essentially the same place that we added tension into the rhythm guitar part when the chords are ascending by a fourth, or 5 frets in guitar speak. So here's the cycle of fourths, there it is, and there are basically 2 main points in the chord sequence where we're kind of using the cycle of fourths, and that's where the A goes up to the D chord, and where the E chord goes back to the A chord again. And those are the main places where we're going to be adding the jazzy, tension, exotic sounding scales and so on. So, how do we do that? Well, one way of doing it is to use a technique known as tritone substitution. Here's some info on that. Okay, let's begin by looking at some chord notes. Now, I know we're talking about lead guitar here, but bear with me. I promise you by the end of this little clip, you will know an easy way of adding a rather cool sounding jazz lick into your solos. Those are the notes in an E7 chord, and if you remember when we were looking at the rhythm guitar side of things, we ended up playing a B flat 7th over the E7 chord. And looking at the notes in both chords there, you can see that they have a few things in common, or a couple of things in common. They both share a G sharp note. It's called an A flat in the B flat 7th chord, but it's still the same note. And they both share a D note. And if we look at the remaining notes in the B flat 7th chord, the B flat with respect to a E root note is a flattened 5th, and the F with respect to the E7 root note is a flat 9th. Therefore, if you play a B flat 7th chord over an E7th chord, the resulting sound is that of an E7 flat 5 flat 9 chord. And this is a type of altered dominant chord. Altered dominants are 7th chords with either a flat or a sharp 5th or 9th notes, or any combination thereof. For example, a regular A7 contains the notes of A, C sharp, E and G, root, 3rd, 5th and flat 7th. Those are the notes in that chord. And if we were, for example, to raise the 5th, the E note by one semitone, turning it into an F, we would have an A7 sharp 5. If we were to add the sharp 9th of A7 scale, maybe A mixolydian, you would get a C note, and add that into your A7 chord, you get A7 sharp 9. If you were to flatten the 5th of the A7 chord, the E note, down to an E flat, that would give you an A7 flat 5, and all of these chords are what we would call A7 altered chords. Quite often in a chord progression, none of these would be specified. You would just have A7 altered shown in the chord chart, and it's up to you to choose which one you play. Now, going back to our definition of what an altered dominant chord is, a 7th chord with either a flat or a sharp 5th or 9th, here's the cheat. You can fake these chords by simply playing a dominant chord 6 frets or a tritone away from the chord you are playing over. And if you do that as a lead guitar lick, then you can get something that sounds a bit like this. So that's tritone substitution. Now there is a very, very jazzy scale which you can also use, which doesn't take a lot of learning. It's called the Superlocrian mode, or sometimes called the altered dominant scale. And here's the lowdown on that. Okay, let's begin once again by taking a look at some chord notes. Now, the important notes in an A7 chord, the notes which give it its essential character and flavour, are the A, the C sharp and the G. We don't worry too much about the E, it's just the root, the A, the C sharp, which is the 3rd, and the flattened 7th, which is the G, that give the chord its overall sound, really. And we've also established that in order to get that jazzy, exotic kind of flavour to a chord, or anything you play over a chord, you need to add in those altered dominant notes, the flat 9, sharp 9, flat 5, sharp 5. So let's see what we get if we add those into these 3 notes. Well, there's the B flat, the flat 9th, and then there's the C, the sharp 9th. And the E flat gives us a flat 5th, and the F gives us a sharp 5th. And that gives us a scale: A, B flat, C, C sharp, E flat, F and G. And that scale is known as the Superlocrian mode, also known sometimes as the altered dominant scale. And here's a fingering for it, and here's me demonstrating it. And finally, here's a lick using that scale. This is played over an A7 chord as it transitions up to the D7, or D9th in this case. And another scale that Robben is very, very fond of is something called the half step, whole step, diminished scale. Here's the information detailing what's going on with that. As you would expect, given its name, the half step, whole step, diminished scale is made up of a series of half steps and whole steps. Beginning on an A, which is the root note of the A7 chord that you'll be playing this scale over, we go up a half step and that takes us to a B flat. Then a whole step takes us to C, a half step to C sharp, a whole step to E flat, then a half step to E, whole step to F sharp, half step to G, and a whole step back to A again. So those are the notes in the scale. Now let's have a look at how they relate to the A7 chord that you would use this scale over. You can see that the A, C sharp, E and G notes in the scale make up the notes traditionally found in an A7 chord, but we can also see that that B flat gives us a flat ninth, the C gives us a sharp ninth, and the E flat gives us a flattened fifth, which means that this scale will invoke the sound of an A7 flat 9, an A7 sharp 9 and an A7 flat 5. And here's how to play it. And here's a typical lick using this scale being played over the transition from an A7 up to a D7, or in this case D9th chord. And finally, there's another point in the chord sequence where you can get a little bit jazzy and exotic, and here's some information on what you can do there. Okay, if we look at this section of the chord sequence that we're playing over, you can see I've labelled it a 2-5-1 progression, and that's because if we look at the key of A major, which is what we're loosely basing this whole thing around, you will see that the 2 chord is B minor, the 5 chord is E major, and the 1 chord is A major, which is once again what we've got in that particular section of the chord sequence. Hence we have a 2-5-1 sequence which sounds like this. And you can hear that that resolves beautifully to the A major chord at the end, or the A7. And what we need is a scale that will work over that and give us some kind of jazzy tension, and such a scale exists in the form of the melodic minor scale. This is B melodic minor, and you can see that it consists of the notes B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp, G sharp and A sharp, and there you can see the relationships in terms of whole steps and half steps between the notes in that scale. And this is how you play it. And as you saw and heard in that demonstration, I ended up resolving that scale down to an A major chord. It's just such a beautiful way of taking the listener down to that 1 chord and resolving things very satisfactorily. Here's a melodic minor lick which does exactly that. So there you have it. That is pretty much what I've learned from Robben Ford. I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found it useful and maybe even a little bit inspiring. And if you have, then why not hit the subscribe button and the notification bell, and that way you will never miss another video of this type. I will also now just mention the Harley Benton ST62, which is up for auction. This guitar is for sale. Email your bids to me via the email address which is in the description box below this video and at the end of all of these videos as well. When this guitar is sold, proceeds will be going to Zoe's Place, which is a charity in Middlesbrough which provides palliative, respite and end-of-life care to children under 5 with terminal illnesses. A very, very worthy cause that I'm incredibly proud to support. And that's pretty much it for today, folks. I will just mention, as always, that if you would like some tailored one-to-one guitar tuition, then get in touch with me once again via the details at the end of this video. If you live on Teesside in the northeast of England, you can come along for a face-to-face lesson, or wherever you are in the world, you can have a lesson via Skype. And whichever way you do it, your first lesson is free, so you got nothing to lose. And with that, I'll bid you a good day, and thank you for watching, thanks for your time, and I look forward to seeing you all again next time, folks. Bye for now.